Hi, second period. We left off with Dr. Crouch and Molly and Kip were going to try to catch the night gardeners. So, they're just waiting right now and getting things set up and getting ready. You can say that twice, Kip muttered. Even in the cold, Molly felt a hot flush of irritation. Why was Kip so negative about everything? Why couldn't he just trust her? But then, what reason had she given him to trust her? Doctor, she said sweetly, perhaps you can tell us a bit more about your plan. I'm sure it's a thing of brilliance. I wouldn't go that far, child. He gave a laugh that was probably meant to communicate humility. According to your own reports, the creature appears near this tree each night, from which I can only conclude that it is some sort of burrowing mammal, perhaps a weasel or a badger. It's an awful big badger, Kip said. Molly gave him an elbow to the ribs and a look to match. Crouch seemed not to hear him. When the creature appears, if the creature appears, I shall give the sign for you two to start the horse running. He will pull the rope and our trap will be sprung, at which time I shall run forward and capture the creature. Capture him how? Molly said tactfully. A net won't hold him forever. You'll need to lock him up. Or kill him, Kip added. I shall do one better, the doctor exclaimed. I shall freeze it forever in time. He gestured proudly to a device perched atop a tripod. It looked like a pair of billows attached to a bread box, wearing a cape. A variety of straps and cords dangled from the back, one of which seemed to contain a button. Molly studied the strange apparatus. What is that thing? The man chuckled. This thing is a camera obscura. I had planned to document some local fauna, but you've potentially led me to something far more promising. He excitedly removed something that looked like a dustpan from his bag, which he affixed to the top of the box and filled with some white powder. This is a magnesium flash. I ordered it from France just last month. When I pull the lever on this handle, he showed her a small trigger. It will ignite the powder, creating enough light to capture the subject's likeness on one of these plates. He lifted the cloth and back and removed a sheet of tin, about the size of a postcard. A perfect photographic specimen. Molly looked at Kip, a dread of realization creeping over her. Its likeness, she said. You said you'd trap him and take him with you. And I am, in a manner of speaking. Molly stared at the tree, at the trap, at her brother. We need more than manners, she snapped. We need it to go away. She felt Kip's hand on her sleeve. Molly, he whispered. Molly stood up, glaring at the doctor. You lied to us. You made a promise that you would help, but you just want to get your name in some fancy books. You observe as much yourself when enlisting me, Dr. Crouch said patiently. Chin up. If this creature does appear, there will doubtless follow a legend of eager researchers in my wake. Surely one of them will manage to help you. Hang on just 1 second, guys. Molly, Kip repeated louder. We need help now, she shouted. Dr. Crouch stood. Don't let's get hysterical. Perhaps I should prescribe you something. Molly turned around. What is it? She snapped. Kip pointed toward the tree. Someone's coming, he said. Molly and Dr. Crouch both ducked down, peering around the side of the wagon. The spirit's very tall, cloaked all in black, she whispered. Through the gray fog, she could see a shadow winding its way over and through the hills. It moved uncertainly, furtively, creeping and then stopping. Good heavens, Dr. Crouch said, grabbing his camera. His hands were shaking. That's a lot bigger than a badger. Told you, Kip said. Molly studied the figure. It seemed different from the Gardner, shorter and less sure of its steps. As it moved, it rattled. There was something strange yet familiar about the sound. The figure crept onto the leaf-covered ground surrounding the tree. It paced back and forth. In its hand was something long and sharp. Doctor, Molly whispered, I don't think... Shh, the man hissed. On my mark. But doctor, now! Molly didn't move. I said now, the man shouted. He pushed past her and struck Galileo's backside with the broad of his hand. The horse reared up and sprinted off, pulling the wagon and the rope with it. Molly heard a shriek of surprise as the net swept up from the ground, catching its prey in the air. There came a blinding flash of light. Molly fell back as sparks spewed from the doctor's camera and instantly turned to smoke. She covered her mouth, coughing, feeling her way through the cloud. "I've got you," she said to Kip, who had been knocked over in the confusion. Dr. Crouch was already at the net, hopping from side to side like a lucky prospector. "I've done it," he shouted. "I've done it." Molly blinked, her eyes still adjusting. The net dangled from the giant branch, and the ropes groaning with the weight of its quarry, which twisted and rattled in protest. Crouch held his camera in front of him like a weapon. "Back, beast!" The net slowly turned around, and Molly saw a weathered face crowned by white hair and two fiendish eyes. "It's you," she said. Hester Kettle gave a wry, toothless smile. "You were expecting someone else?" So now they caught Hester in the net when they wanted to catch the night gardener. I bet you didn't see that coming, did you? All right, chapter 38 is called Shears. "What are you doing here?" Molly demanded. Hester dangled before them, her arms like legs jutting out of the net at odd angles. "Why, just hanging out." She gave a sideways smile as she rocked past. "Just as I thought." Dr. Crouch thrust a finger in the air. "Your spirit is nothing more than a disease-ridden vagrant. Storyteller, if it pleases," Hester said. "Contagious, no doubt. She's probably given Crouch fever to half the valley." Dr. Crouch traded his camera for a large syringe from his belt and removed a cork from the end of the needle. "Now, children, hold the woman down while I collect a sample of her blood." "Save your time," Molly said. "She's not what's making us sick." The doctor hesitated, needle poised. "Are you quite certain? Because were I to imagine a source of Crouch fever, it might look something like this." Hester batted her eyelashes. "You're too kind, sir." Molly grabbed the net, turning Hester to her face. "You didn't answer my question. What are you doing here?" The old woman hemmed and hawed. "Well, love, it's hard to say." Molly folded her arms. "Try." "She's come to see the tree." Kip stepped beside her. "Just look at what she's carrying." He indicated the sharp thing that clasped in the woman's hand. In the light of Dr. Crouch's lamp, Molly could see that it was a pair of old shears. She was going to take cutting of the tree, he said, snip it off a little bit so she could plant her own. Molly looked back at Hester. "That true?" Hester sighed. "True or not, it's clear you're set on believing it." She eyed the branch overhead, which was sagging. "Perhaps you might let me down so we can hash it out like good neighbors." Much as Molly would have liked to let Hester dangle, she knew that if the branch snapped, their trap would be ruined. She nodded to Kip, who hobbled to Galileo and set to coaxing him back toward the house. The net jerked up and down as the horse fought against the reins. "Easy with that horsey," Hester called. "You wouldn't want to drop an old woman on her head." "Wouldn't we?" Molly stepped back as the net slowly worked its way to the ground. The doctor, who had evidently gotten his hopes up about finding a cure, was clearly out of sorts. He removed the pin plate from his camera and tossed it aside. "My dear woman, do you realize that we've just interrupted, I dare say ruined, an extremely important experiment?" He swatted a leaf from the air in front of him. "I am on the cusp of a discovery that could change my career. Have you anything to say for yourself?" Hester looked as if she were about to oblige, but stopped short. A hollow moaning filled the darkness. She widened her eyes, looking past the doctor toward the house. Her expression was a mixture of terror and fascination. "As luck might have it," she swallowed, raising a trembling finger, "you still might get your chance." An ice gust of wind rattled the leaves around them. Galileo snorted, frantically pulling at his reins. The net swayed from side to side, and the tree groaned overhead. Molly shivered, slowly turning around. The night gardener was watching them. Chapter 39, The Broken Bough. Molly stared at the gardener, who was standing at the edge of the drive, the open front door behind him, the shovel and watering can in his hands. Even in the shadows, his skin shone with a silver light. He did not move, but cocked his head, looking between them with patient curiosity. Like a story come to life, Hester murmured breathlessly. Keep still, Molly whispered. Don't nobody move or shout. He's just here for the tree. He won't hurt us none. She tried not to think about whether or not this was the true fact. She definitely tried not to think about the open graves at her feet. Dr. Crouch grabbed his camera box and inched toward the night gardener. I just need one photograph. Doctor, no! Molly reached for his arm, but she was too slow. Crouch was already on the other side of the tree. He uncorked a bottle from his belt and dumped some powder into the flash tray. Hester leaned toward Molly. You sure he won't hurt us, love? Molly swallowed. I'm not sure of anything anymore. Dr. Crouch was now only a few feet from the drive. The night gardener had not moved, but Molly could hear a slow sough of warning. Crouch, old boy, say hello to history. The doctor inched closer like a man hypnotized. The spirit cocked his head, his black eyes fixed on the doctor. Dead leaves circled around him like a barrier. Dr. Crouch slowly aimed his camera at the night gardener. Whoosh! The leaves attacked, knocking the doctor back. He shouted as a gust of wind ripped the camera from his hands. The wooden box sailed through the darkness, flying straight past Molly's head and smashing against the side of the house. So much for this experiment, Hester called, her net swaying in the wind. Run, you fools! Dr. Crouch was sprinting straight toward them, a look of bloodless terror on his face. Out of my way! He shoved Molly aside, nearly knocking her into one of the open graves. Step aside, boy, he bellowed. I'm commanding this wagon. He was fighting with Kip for control of the reins. Kip, however, would not give up. Let go, you fat gob! Galileo snorted, pulling against his harness. The wagon rolled forward and back. Molly heard a loud clatter as Hester's net swung wildly to one side and slammed against the side of the house. She heard more shouting from the wagon, and the net slid high into the air. Perhaps you might give your brother a hand, Hester called down. The humor drained from her voice. Molly looked back at the night gardener, who now had the shovel in his hand raised like a weapon. Molly looked at the wagon and saw that Dr. Crouch, who had knocked Kip to the ground, was now pulling himself onto the bench. She sprang to her feet and ran toward him. The trap! We have to lower the net! She grabbed hold of his apron. Unhand me! The doctor struck Molly hard across the cheek. She gripped the side of the wagon, gasping. She could taste blood in her mouth, and her entire face throbbed with a pain she had never felt before. She tried to stand up, but her legs were too weak. Dr. Crouch stared down at her. Don't look at me like that, he said, taking the reins. It's survival of the fittest. You don't touch my sister. Kip grabbed his leg, pulling him down from the bench. The man hit the ground beside him, the reins still in his hand. Galileo neighed, rearing up on two legs. Molly heard a sharp creaking sound as Hester's net swayed from the tree, and then, crack! The branch snapped clean from the trunk. Hester cried out as her net plummeted to the earth. She hit the ground with a back-breaking crash pinned beneath the branch. Molly heard a windy snarl. The night gardener staggered forward, stumbling to his knees. He dropped his shovel and watering can, which spilled uselessly onto the grass. Dr. Crouch watched beside Molly. What's happening to it? The night gardener was doubled over, writhing in pain. Leaves darted around his head, slashing this way and that in a flurry of confused rage. Molly looked at the tree. Black sap covered the place where the branch had been torn off, like blood from a wound. I don't think he liked that, she said. The night gardener planted his hands on the ground and slowly, painfully brought himself to his feet. He teetered from side to side, his weight unsteady. He saw the broken branch atop Hester's body. He released a roar that shook the very ground. Dr. Crouch forgot about the horse and scrambled to his feet. It was all their idea, he cried out. It's them you want. He started running as fast as he could to the opposite direction. The night gardener pointed his skeletal hands toward the stables. Molly heard a sharp wrenching sound as a gust ripped the wide stable door clean off its hinges. The night gardener snapped his arm in the direction of the door, who was halfway to the bridge. The giant door soared across the lawn, spinning toward its target. Don't look! Molly grabbed Kip, covering his eyes. There was no scream, only a sharp crashing sound. She looked across the lawn where the doctor had been. There was now only a door with 2 unmoving feet sticking out beneath it. She stared back at the night gardener, who wore on his face a look of icy satisfaction. "You killed him!" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Killed him in cold blood right in front of us." The spirit tipped his hat as if accepting a compliment. He stepped to the place where Hester lay. The old woman turned over, groaning under the weight of the branch. "You pups best run," she croaked. A shimmer of blood trickled from her mouth. Kip grabbed Molly's arm. "I can get the horse, but the rope's still tied to her. If we run, it'll kill her." Molly scanned the moonlit ground, searching for something, anything that might protect them. She remembered what Kip had told her before, that the night gardener didn't like fire. She needed the torch or lamp, or even a match. Then she saw it. Lying among the splintered bits of the doctor's camera was the metal flash pan. "Cut the rope from the wagon," she called. "I'll do the rest." She scrambled across the dirt, nearly tumbling into one of the graves. She grabbed the flash. Inside the pan was a small amount of white powder. Molly hoped it would be enough. The gardener had removed the branch from on top of Hester's body and set it beside the trunk. He held out a hand and his shovel flew into it. Molly charged at the man, holding the flash in front of her. "Over here!" She pulled the trigger and a burst of fire erupted into her hands. The night gardener staggered backward, thrashing his arms as flames swept over his body. Molly coughed, shielding her face from the smoke. She scrambled to Hester's side. "We're getting you out of here," she said. She grabbed Hester's shears and cut the net away from her body. The woman groaned in pain as Molly hoisted her up on her shoulder. Molly half carried, half dragged the woman to the wagon. Kip was there, waiting, with the gate down. The gardener roared behind Molly, who looked over her shoulder to see him staggering toward them, his body smoldering in the moonlight. The flames had burned away his cloak, and Molly gasped to see the man's leg. It was twisted in on itself, the bone splintered at the knee. Black sap ran thick down his trousers and boots, staining the grass as he moved. "Get in front," Molly shouted, holding Hester's body. "I've got her." Kip scrambled through the bed of the wagon and grabbed the reins. Molly braced her shoulder against Hester's weight and with a strained cry lifted the woman onto the cart. "Go!" She scrambled in after him. Kip snapped the reins and they bolted ahead. Molly gripped the side rails as they raced over the hills toward the gravel drive. Not hills, she thought. Graves. She could see the gardener coming after them. Even with his broken leg, he was unhumanly fast. "Hold tight," Kip yelled as the wagon hit the drive and shot forward. The gardener, still right behind him, raised his hand, and a gust of wind brought Hester's shears into his open palm. He flung them at the wagon. Thwunk! Molly rolled to one side as the blades sank into the wood behind her, quivering like an arrow. "Faster!" she shouted at Kip as they rattled onto the wooden bridge. The gardener reached out a bony hand, snatching her leg. Molly screamed, kicking herself free. She heard a sharp howl and saw the gardener's body jerk backward. It fell to the bridge with a crash. Molly nearly fell with him as Kip turned onto the road on the far side of the river. She clung to the side of the wagon, eyes fixed on the gardener. He snarled, pacing back and forth along the far end of the bridge, furious, but it seemed unable to cross over. Molly, Kip, and Hester rattled up the path and around the bend. She could hear the gardener's howls echoing behind them. Okay, so we're in part 3 of the book, and it is called Departures. And chapter 40 is called The Last Story. I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.